see whether the field of humanitarian action, which I believe all of us are perhaps interested in some way, whether that field has the ability to fix or address the long-standing challenges to forced migration, and if so, to what extent. I'll try to use a case study for one of our projects, which, and then we can have that discussion. Actually, that's the whole point of this, to see what do you think after we share what we are doing or trying to do against what would not to be an issue or a challenge for forced migration. To what extent can we address these matters? In terms of outline, well, Joanna is gone, so I have no clue on how to get to the next slide. Should we wait for her, you think, or should I manually? Thank you. Try again now. Okay, good. So we'll be briefly talking about forced migration, but this is something that we all know or can even guess from the words themselves. And then hopefully also briefly look at humanitarian action. And then I will introduce the project that is called Campus, which is an acronym and what it stands for. So moving on, first of all, just to, how do we go backwards, Joanna? This looks forward only, or backwards is here. Yeah, I was just going to say that just to say that it's, I know that there are migrants who move from one country to another for different reasons. And of course, it's, they also have their own set of experiences, both positive and then challenges. But we are going to be focusing on forced migration, as it says in the title. And forced migration comes with a whole lot of pressures, as we know. There are risks. It is sudden and there's very little to smile about, at least in the aftermath, in the immediate aftermath of a forced migration experience. And in terms of what is, you know, what you would know this, but just to give a recap of the difference between those two is that ideally in voluntary migration, you have migrants making the decisions to move. It is voluntary, you are aware, hopefully you are prepared as well, at least you take some steps. And then, yeah, there would be those factors that will determine who does what and where you go from, and where you're headed to. Whereas on the other hand, forced migration, really it is totally involuntary and you have no role in making decisions. A person has no say, no power, no preparation, absolutely, for what is going to happen to them. I know that I'm probably obstructing, but I was told to move here. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, cool. And these are the different types, really. They're all negative as we know them. They all have challenges: slavery, human trafficking. If you're conscripted into the military, the children whose parents have, or guardians, caretakers have migrated. But today, this evening, we are going to focus a lot on the refugee population, because they are also usually, they are forced migrants. They are a category of forced migrants. And just to give a general picture on how in Africa things are moving, you can see different arrows that the scope of forced migration is quite high, and it goes in all kinds of directions, both within Africa, because some of the forced migrants will stay in Africa, but then they will also go to other countries outside the continent. The causes and effects of forced migration, we know them, there are very many. I don't know how participatory we can be in this, because it's not a lecture, it's a seminar, but if we could think about the different, maybe one cause or two, and then an effect of that. Do you mind sharing with me what your thoughts are on that? What could be some of the causes of forced migration? Anyone would like to contribute? Yes. Famine, absolutely. So if there's famine, somebody's moving to a place, you're forced suddenly to just move and hopefully get a place that has food security and nutrition opportunities. Any other? Yes, sir. Huh? Wars, absolutely. Conflict. You just wake up one day, it's no longer safe, you have to move. Any others? Forced migration.
Floods.
Security. I was asking the causes of forced migration, and yeah, security reasons as well. If it's no longer safe, maybe somebody is being persecuted at a personal or community level or group level, that could also cause. Anyone else? Natural disasters, yes, floods, landslides, and earthquakes. Yeah, all those cause to they lead to forced migration. Yes, at the back. Absolutely. We all know that very negative effect that climatic changes have brought about, and people are being forced to move. Thank you. Can we go to the effects? What does that then lead to generally? Anyone would like to share? After people are forced to move, what might be the consequences of that? So, violence, absolutely, because suddenly you're in a place, it's new and anything can happen. So security issues as well, and violence at all levels, household, individual, and national level, yes. Yeah, you know what? Good one, that, because when you go to a new place, that means you're constraining the existing resources, and if it's forced, it's sudden, usually. So the receiving territory or country or family or space is not really prepared, and yet you need the services. So yeah, that's a very important issue and challenge that we are dealing with. Any other consequences or effects we could think about on a social level, at the political level, economic, culture, anything? Maybe one or two more. Yes. Yeah, unemployment. And we can all think about how that comes about. Maybe there are language barriers, there are fewer jobs for migrants. Yeah, thank you, that's true. Sorry? Yes, then we have this growing phenomenon of migrants that are not documented. And we know that what is not documented is very easy to lose track of. It's very difficult to support those kinds of people. And then they would be directly or indirectly contributing to things like even crime, or, you know, government policy or public policy becomes very difficult to plan, to implement, to even assess the policy impacts of some of the efforts that governments and other stakeholders might be wanting to put in place. Yes, at the back. Provisional? Yes. There's all those, as you can see, thank you so much, a lot of effects. I haven't had a positive one though. Do you mean to say, people in this audience, that there's nothing good that comes out of forced migration? Can you think, is there anything positive? Maybe, maybe not. I will not push you on that. Yes. Okay, so like forward progressive policies to accommodate that. Yes, that is a good one. But I think what is also very clear is that forced migration has more downsides than advantages. And ideally, people shouldn't be forced out of their spaces without preparation, without it being a voluntary action, because the challenges outweigh the benefits, as we can see from the answers in this room. So then usually when people are forced out of their territories, of their families, of their communities and countries, most times, the first interface, if it is an organized group kind of thing, then they will go to a place where they are recipients of what we call humanitarian action, which I believe most people in this room might even know more than I do in terms of theory, in terms of what has been written about it. So then humanitarian action comes in with, trying to move to the next slide, please. So yeah, so then you have humanitarian action, which comes in to sort of relieve that and try and protect and save lives, because in that trajectory of moving from where you've been comfortable, your safe place to another place, there's a lot of collateral damage, if I could use that word, but there are a lot of things that happen along the way. The worst being the loss of lives, but there's loss of identity, loss of dignity, loss of property, loss of, so many memories and traumas that affect these people. So the first, usually the first interface for forced migrants, and in particular, if we could focus on refugees, who are the topic of our our conference talk tonight, they will get some sort of humanitarian aid. And there are lots of, thankfully, there are many agencies that are contributing to this and providing humanitarian action in the different places where forced migrants are. Of course, they are led overall by UNHCR for the refugees as the umbrella UN body in charge of dealing with the humanitarian response for refugees, but then supported by hundreds and thousands of implementing partners at all levels. Some are international NGOs, some are local NGOs. Then you also even have different levels called CBOs, community-based organizations, the different levels of NGOs. And they all bring their resources, skill, networks to the table to try and alleviate the problem of forced migrants, in particular refugees, in order to protect and try to save their lives, to remove suffering. They also try to meet the basic needs. And usually the perspective that they're using is one that aims to reduce their vulnerability and also build their capacity. Now, these are really ambitious aims to do in a very short time and with a very traumatized population that is just still experiencing the aftermath of shock after being forcefully kicked or pushed out of their spaces. So I am now going to tell you a bit about that project called Campus. Campus is an acronym for cross-border opportunities for migration, peace, and self-sustenance. And it is that Lives in Dignity is a facility, it's a grant facility from which we were able to get funding for this project by the European Union. And this campus project operates in 2 countries. Uganda is the host or receiving country for the refugees. And Uganda hosts almost over 3/4 of the 101.5 million refugees that we receive from South Sudan. And that's a lot. In fact, the policy of Uganda has been talked about in the literature. If you read, it's been uploaded for being open door and described in some places as the world's most compassionate refugee policy. And it's mainly because refugees, when they come into the country, they are given a place to stay, they are given land. It's not so big, but everyone has some land. Uganda is predominantly an agricultural country, so they're given land to cultivate, grow some vegetables and some food, but then they're also getting relief items and food items as well from the organizations like UNHCR and its implementing partners. And then the beauty about the refugee policy for Uganda is the integration approach. That whether you're a refugee or a member of the host community, you get the same services. You get the same education, you go to the same health facilities, you can get employment, you can get out if you want. In fact, you can even own land, you can buy buildings, it's really up to you, depending of course on your capacity. But its approach is more of enabling. In fact, in Uganda, we don't have what we call refugee camps, we call them settlements. And the idea is to try and have a long-term perspective, because most of the refugees, at least those who come from South Sudan, you might know, if you've read about South Sudan, is that the conflict has been protracted for a very, very long time. They rarely go back. We have people who came in 20 years ago. It has a downside and a positive thing, but the idea is to get them be able to stay for as long as they want and get self-sustenance, build resilience, and then later on move from these settlements and get integrated into the community. They do have, they can work, they can do many things. It's a fairly supportive policy, and it also integrates the host communities that are very near to these settlements. Of course, there will be also the urban refugees who go and live in towns out there on their own, not in the concentrated settlements. But then sometimes when you walk in these places, you might not even be able to tell that this is a settlement, because it's like a village. There's people doing farming, there are people, there are schools in that area. You can't tell who is a refugee child and who is not. The health facilities will not ask really for your identity unless if it's required for data purposes, but it's open services. That said, the services have their own challenges because you might know that Uganda is a low and middle income country and it has system challenges with health system, the education system, but what is there, they share it with the refugee community. And I think that has gotten the policy, applauded in international and even local circles. So you have those two countries on this project. We also have South Sudan. Now, on the campus project, South Sudan really represents three categories of forced migrants in one way or another. It's the country of displaced, well, there are those who are displaced within their countries who stay there. So those are the IDPs. Then Sudan also sends refugees to Uganda, but then also there are some of those refugees who are supposed to go back home. They are called returnees. So on this campus project, we are dealing with four categories of forced migrants. We're dealing with the IDPs, we're dealing with the refugees, we are dealing with the returnees, and then we're also dealing with the host community because it's cross-country. And can I just say at any point, if you feel you have a question or something is not clear, please let me know and I'll be happy to clarify. Yes, so as said earlier, the project is funded by the EU. UNOPS is the UN Office for Special Projects. Then BROT is Bread for the World. Those are the funding agencies. On this side, you have the implementing partners. That's the Lutheran World Federation. It's an alliance of multiple Lutheran church communities, but they have a development arm that does humanitarian and development work. And then we also have an organization in South Sudan called Community Development Service. So LWF, Lutheran World Federation, is an international NGO. CDSS, Community Development Support Services in South Sudan, is a local CBO. It's really small scale, if you like, but it is implementing interventions within South Sudan itself. And then you have us, which is Makerere University, and this is my center, the center that I belong to. It's a Center for Health and Socio-Economic Improvement. We come in to support these two. LWF has a South Sudan office on this campus project. It also has the LWF Uganda side. So there are two really in one. CDSS also operates on the side of South Sudan. Makerere provides, we are the learning partner on this project to try and track measurement progress while these other two are implementing the interventions because that's what they're doing best. So we are research, learning and documentation partners. And when it comes to the Lutheran World Federation, they work in three strategic areas, livelihoods, quality services, and then they also do protection and social cohesion. They also across that whole emergency recovery and development continuum. Yeah, I think that's what they do, livelihoods, services, service delivery, so that's education, health, and all these other services, and then they also do protection. This NGO, it was established during the war. It's one of the we've been for years as a university, we've been looking for partners to work with on the side of South Sudan, and it's been incredibly hard to find one. So this CDSS is a miracle in a way, because you can drive for hundreds and thousands of kilometers without finding, leave alone a community, or and then when you find an organization, even when it has fragile capacity, at least they have the community, they have the contextual capacity to support whatever it is that you're trying to do. So we're really very, very glad to be partnering with them. They undertake different interventions, and we think their partnership is really strategic because they are local, they know things better. And of course, the LWF in South Sudan is also helping because they're in the space. But remember, they are big time, they are humanitarian, they are international. We needed a grassroots organization to support this as well. So again, in terms of the project, yeah, these are the places where we're operating. I'm sure it would be difficult to pronounce some of these names, but there you are. There are very many. We are implementing different services and interventions in three places, which is economic or livelihood development, then delivery of integrated basic services. This is in health and then in education mostly, and then we are also undertaking protection in development, and this includes mental health and psychosocial support, among many other things like peace building and conflict resolution. Lots of interventions in schools, in health facilities, in communities, at the policy level as well. Different levels at the subnational, national, and local level. Now, when we are, and yeah, the total number of project beneficiaries we are hoping to reach is this 67,000, over 67,000 people. That's a distribution across male and female, across Uganda and South Sudan, and across who are returning, who are the IDPs, who are the refugees. That's just a general breakdown. So, and then it's, well, it's a 2.5-year project. It's not even very long, but that's the funding we got. We're trying to do the best that we can. Usually you build on from one of them. We were actually building on from a small pilot project we did with that organization, CDSS, where we undertook a needs assessment, and we built on from this to secure this funding, which was great. So hopefully we can get more if we still need to do more work. Okay, so I think we said that one of the things that they do is mental health and psychosocial support under the protection theme. I just want to show you a picture of one of our master's students. She's called Daniela. She's from the University of Gothenburg. I know some of you might know about a program called M Family. Daniela is she's a psychologist, a clinical psychologist, I think, and one of the interventions that we are implementing under this campus project is on we are operationalizing a WHO tool. I don't know if we have any psychologists in this room. It's called IPGT, interpersonal group therapy, where people come together to talk about anything that, you know, mental health or psychosocial challenges that they're experiencing. So it's a WHO tool. It's been used globally all over the world, and we are implementing it in our implementation sites for people that have mental health and psychosocial challenges. And then we are able to, we know that most of the issues that have to do with mental health, some of them are related to livelihood. So we're also trying to do linking across our intervention. So you get people who are on that treatment, the psychosocial support or that therapy, then link them to livelihoods, and then make sure they go to school. And if they have health conditions, you refer them to the hospital. So we're trying to also do a linking and a multi-intersectoral linkage in the implementation approach. So that's Daniela, and she was interfacing with some of the people that are receiving these services. And then if we move on to, thank you. Yeah. Okay, and then these are some of our other colleagues, some of my team members also, who this has a lot to do with some of the messages. It's amazing because what is needed usually in these communities, you find that the solutions have to be low cost, but yet very contextually valid, especially in the face of limited resources that we are seeing dwindling with a lot of, we'll see this a bit later, but you all know that right now the humanitarian response is diverted and it's spread thin because of the many humanitarian earthquakes. Ukraine, you know, everywhere, there's so much demand. So there's not so much, and yet if you intervene low cost but effective interventions that have been proven, you will get a lot of results from it. And we are seeing that interpersonal group therapy is a very small thing. Well, not small, but this is WHO validated on a global scale, but it involves getting people together. It's aligned with people's cultural values, what they feel about, what will bring them joy, whether, you know, positive culture will promote mental health, happy marriage promotes good mental health. You get them to write, to process, to think, and you find that you're not really spending a lot of exorbitant sums of money on like clinical services core, but yet you are affirming people's own social cultural values and needs, and at the same time addressing their psychosocial needs sometimes. So low-cost interventions, but they are effective. And then there are those cases, of course, which are extreme, that maybe will need real clinical care. We're able to screen those out with the mental health professionals and then refer them for more specialized care. Because everyone who is a forced migrant has in some way, one way or another, experienced some shock. So they're always at just different levels of need and complexity as far as their situation is concerned. So we get them to do those things, draw things, whatever works for them. For the children, it's more child-centered participatory methods, but then we'll get them to talk about the things they've bottled for a long time. And then we're able to train their teachers to now be able to support them within that learning setting, especially where they are with host community children that have not experienced their kind of trauma. We found over time that children from, of course, trauma, you probably already know that when you come from a violent setting, usually your default position is also be violent. It's the first thing that they're very violent, they're very short-tempered, they fight very easily. So trying to deal with those emotions and socializing them to a new kind of life is one of the things that is being implemented under the protection angle of our campus project. Now, there are a number of implementation issues, but I'm going to focus on just about one or two of them for you to understand how implementation realities can be different from what is on ground or from what funders or the international community get to really see or think about these kinds of implementation. So the first thing is that already there is a peace agreement between Uganda and South Sudan. But like I mentioned earlier, the war continues to be protracted, recurring, and there are no structures. There are no structures in most places for people to return home to. So they end up never returning, even when there is a peace agreement, even when there is a desire to return, they kind of keep thinking, it's not peaceful. But then, okay, even if there was no war in this region for this length of time, if I went back, there are no schools for my children, there are no health services. If I farm and, start a business, the rebels will just show up out of nowhere and take that. So that kind of stability is not guaranteed. So people end up staying in next door. But also the interesting thing is that most of these border points on both countries actually speak the same language. They are related. Some of them have families on the other side and then they go to school this side. So it's a very complex thing. They'll say, well, my farm is in Sudan, South Sudan, I'll go there and farm, but then I live here. My cousins are this side. So it's us who kind of think about these countries as borders. In their minds, it is borderless sometimes. So how do you deal with that if you're trying to bring peace into the region and at the same time get to settle the people who really need to go back to their context and settle and build back, support building back the infrastructure, some of which could be definitely outside the scope of projects like ours. But then we are working very closely with the government, the central government, the local governments, and trying to get people on board to ensure that the repatriation policy and processes that are in place are not just a gimmick, but people can actually later on be able to go back home when the infrastructure is set, when the skills have been, capacity has been strengthened, because this side, for example, we are strengthening skills in livelihoods. So get a business, get a skill, start that. You don't want to go the other side and then you have nothing to do. People would rather stay this side. So those repatriation and return processes and what people think about when they're thinking about going back home is what a lot of partners, not just us, this is just a small iota, small drop in the ocean of what's being, the effort being done by partners combined, but it's what they're trying to work on. So first of all, the other thing I said, refugees keep going back and forth on a daily basis. Not all of them, but most of them. They have farms, they have some families. So the men, for example, will send their families and then stay there fighting. So they're either in rebel groups or they are in some business in the unsafe part of it. Then their families are this side. It's very difficult. Now, when you denounce your refugee status, that means you will not be getting maybe support from UNHCR and organizations that are operating. So even those who go out, they will not they will not say, I am no longer here, I am this side. So they are both here and there. And that makes the response, the humanitarian response, very difficult, or even the development response. It's difficult to track, it's difficult to know how many people are moving, because they move for pragmatic reasons, according to them. They basically are said in their minds, a number of them, South Sudan and Uganda are borderless. They speak the same language. I can move here and move there. And then we also have very porous borders and a lot of shortcuts that are not official checkpoints where you have to give your passport to be stamped or tracked into the system. They use that all the time. And then of course that also has brought about security tensions, because we've had instances before where maybe the rebels will come through and then go and kill their enemy in a certain camp, that kind of thing. So it's pragmatic for the ordinary people, but then for security agencies, it's a very worrying trend that they are trying to contain. But then also for the humanitarian responders, they want to be able to know who is going in and who is coming out. When we're talking about returnees or refugees, who is who? Somebody is both. They go and then after 3 years, they will come back. And then you find that the same people you recruited onto a livelihoods program, provided training, now they are back to the reception center 3 years later. So again, I said it defeats purpose and constrains the process that we know to be what should happen, that you come in, get support, are settled, and when you're ready, you go back home and hopefully use the skills that you have received over time. We don't see that happening in a linear manner as it should have happened. And so we continue to have that pragmatic challenge. I think we've discussed what is needed. They think about services mostly and security, education services, health services, networks, their social capital. If everyone they know is on this side of the border, then they are not motivated at all to go back to the other side and start alone. And these are sparsely populated spaces. You find maybe in the realm of 50 kilometers, there's only maybe 2-3 families. Why would you want to go there, especially after you've been in a place that's a bit safe, despite its limitations? Because also refugee settlements are not perfect, they are small, they are crowded, the rations are being reduced now with World Food Programs. So it's not exactly rosy to be in that setting, but it's better than being back home where there's absolutely nothing and then plus no security. So that is one of the things. And then I think I've talked about the porous borders and how most refugees think it's just an extension of my home, my culture, my people. So you government officials can say, don't cross the border, but I'll go back and check on my farm, check on my grandparents, come back and all that. So those movements, we've called them yo-yo migratory movements, and the reasons are mostly social, economic, and cultural as well. Sometimes they go for their cultural galas or rituals or things that they need to do in their countries. And here I just have a quotation from one of the local leaders who was explaining what I've just said in his words. I'll give you a moment to have a read. I don't know if people inside can read. But basically, this community leader was saying that many people are returning to South Sudan illegally without informing UNHCR or the office of the Prime Minister. They return illegally because they want to keep their refugee status and because they don't know what will happen in South Sudan, even after this peace agreement. On the other side, many who left earlier are crossing back into Uganda. The driving force is famine. I think somebody mentioned that. And access to better social services in Uganda, like education and health. There's also more new arrivals coming, and they're fleeing because of the same reasons. And because now people are starting to become unsure about the current peace deal. So that obviously constrains movement. One of our partners on the projects is called Charles Ogeno. Joanna, I'm trying to get something out. So Charles he wrote a paper not so long ago. If you have time, I would encourage you to have a read of this paper on pragmatic mobilities and uncertain lives, agency and the everyday mobility of South Sudanese refugees in Uganda. It's a published piece, and we're using it to inform some of the interventions that we're doing. But it's a good, interesting insight into how these movements are, why they are, some of the things which I've briefly touched on, but it covers that in detail. So if you can, please access that paper and read it. He's one of our project partners. So that's one of the implementation challenges. The second one is on, I think it will go. Okay, hang on. Yeah, so the second implementation reality that they have to deal with is the humanitarian development continuum, that whole thing. First of all, I think I've talked about the reducing resources, the dwindling resources that are affecting or that are being apportioned to other necessary spaces like Ukraine, like all these other places. So there's less resources for humanitarian action. But then also beyond that, the programming approaches that are preferred, that are predominant, that are being that are classical and have been implemented this whole time. There's one called care and maintenance approach in humanitarian. Those of you who read about this, you can find out more, but it's basically dealing with the now, the crisis, the emergency. But as I've said, some of these people stay for so long. And then 3 years later, we're still dealing with care and emergency when you've already invested so much, and ideally you should be moving from the humanitarian to now a more later stage, more development. Their needs are different as they stay longer. They've learned the language, they've got networks. Some of them already have businesses because they're given capital and all these other things. So their needs are different from someone who has just arrived 1 month, 1 year ago. And yet, so we found that for such people, and generally across the humanitarian action, it falls short in promoting self-reliance, which is what the national policy in Uganda really pushes for: promote self-reliance, promote resilience, get people to use their skills, but also the effort of the hundreds of humanitarian agencies which are intervening in this space would be put to waste. Okay, if they train them in things, give them startup kits or give them skills, and then after many years they are still getting handouts. It's not enabling at all, and we found it to really, it's not really solving some of the factors that would have pushed them to come out of their homes. And needless to say, dependency is inevitable in such cases. But then beyond that, there are also shifts in programming that are called to different shifts. So there's something called the Humanitarian Development Nexus, which really is, it's moved on from something that used to be called LRRD, which is linking relief, rehabilitation to development. So you kind of move in the aftermath. Immediately it's emergency, but after that, people don't need emergency. They need schools, they need healthcare, they need skills, they need livelihoods options, they need to express themselves. If they were professionals back home, they want to be in gainful employment. And then remember, our policy, the overarching policy, is talking about integration. You can go and work, you can contribute, but then the reality of that becomes very difficult with some of the programming approaches that are being pushed, sometimes by the funding community, sometimes by the international scholars that might not have a very maybe in-depth understanding on the dynamics of the refugees we're dealing with. That sometimes we're dealing with recurrent ones who are not as vulnerable. They've just been around, gone back, come back, gone back, come back, that kind of thing. So when these realities come in and they are open to people who are funding or people who are studying this field, I think we'll begin to see more of these changes happening, and we won't have some of these approaches that fall short in addressing the needs of the unique needs, the diverse needs of the different refugees. And this is even grounded in something called the global, some of you might have heard about the Global Compact on Refugees, which essentially is that global compact. For it, it's a framework. And it's being pushed by UNHCR and a lot of agencies at the global level and ratified by the home governments of receiving and sending countries for refugees. That basically we should have more equitable and predictable responsibility sharing, and that all stakeholders should try and ensure that the countries which are receiving, the host communities which are receiving refugees, do not get constrained, because that's one of the things I said. Uganda, even for its own citizens, it struggles to provide all the basic care. But now there you are, you have, you know, refugees, and very many of them, and you're supposed to share schools when there are not enough chairs in the school. And then they come with the different dynamics, like the challenge maybe of languages. The teacher in whichever subject cannot speak the language of these people. So you have to bring in translation services, additional, even their social culture things are different for them to adapt and be able to take up the learning outcomes that the teacher needs. So it gets more complex, and the resources are spread thin. And can I also say that unfortunately my country is one of those that are ranked very high in corruption. So we have a lot of siphoning of resources, that even the actual resources that are supposed to go to service delivery do not really reach. Then the ones brought by the humanitarian community, they can only help, but to a certain extent. So we are dealing with many issues at different levels for both the nationals and also the refugees that we are trying to host. So with such frameworks like the GCL, really ideally we should see more stakeholders at the macro level, policy decision makers, funders, really trying to strengthen this cooperation, but also get the goodwill, get the participation, active and meaningful participation of not just the stakeholders on the receiving side, but also the refugee communities and host communities themselves, the local community, and including them in the planning, in the execution and assessment of the services that are happening in their places. And that's where we also try to pitch in as a campus project. I say campus is, of course, it's an acronym, but we really wanted to try and see, can we devise durable solutions with our small funding, with our short timelines? We have an opportunity where we have academia. And again, this is something that academics in this room and you as students and scholars in this field could think about. How do we demonstrate relevance to the small efforts that are happening, which will hopefully eventually turn into the critical mass that we want to see, and we see some changes. We have limited time, we have limited resources, but then we are trying to say, okay, academia, can we measure this? Can we support learning and documentation? Can we support engagement? Because sometimes, you know, after a period of work in this space, the NGOs just become almost like implementing robots, you know, just go give, and there's no empathy, there's no compassion. They're just ticking off boxes and trying to show funders, oh, we implemented that, we did this, 3,000 refugees got this help. When you speak to the people on ground, they're telling you, that intervention, I don't think I picked really any skills, but according to their tick boxing and reporting and getting more funding, and it's almost like it's a business really for a number of them. So we're seeing the ethics, the dilemmas, the moral and professional dilemmas that have to be dealt with as the researchers just following this process and trying to support the learning and the integration of data so that programming is evidence-based and data-driven. I think these are questions that we have for not just this partnership, but for the future. And again, we don't have a lot of NGOs partnering with academic institutions to implement their programs. Again, it's a new thing that we are sort of pioneering, and we're really happy to be part of this. Typically, all these organizations, Lutheran and a lot of other international organizations, I would go in consulting capacity for them. I'm a consultant. They just hire me. I will come, undertake their baseline study, give them the report, and off I go back to my university job. Now, what they do with my baseline study is one thing. Then I will come back, undertake endline assessment inline survey. I will take the survey. So we've always been more transactional, short-term, and not really engaging. But now we have under this project an opportunity to really sit and be partners. Because when I give you the data and recommendations, I don't have a say on how you will use them. But here we're also trying to hold them accountable, also as we learn, and then embed some of this learning in our teaching for our students who are going to be leaders, who are already, actually, most of our master's students are already working in these humanitarian and policy and management positions. So we know that the change will come from all the different little efforts that we're doing as we continue teaching. So it's both giving and taking, but also holding each other accountable and making sure that we are improving, whether it's in academia or in practice or in policy. And yeah, so we are trying to move beyond the usual, you know, what are we doing, and trying to look ahead. So when people say that for me to go back, I need the schools to be working, I need the hospitals to be working, I need to be sure, mothers usually, because the majority, 3/4 of the refugee population is women and children. So we're now on the South Sudan side, our partners are implementing education projects like infrastructure, putting in place centers for youth, schools, and equipping the teachers. The health system strengthening is also happening there. It's basically infrastructure development, and then preparing the people who are preparing for the people who will be coming back, and also trying to meet the needs of those who have returned. Remember how I said we have returnees as well as part of our project beneficiaries. So we're trying to address that. You know, as I said, with all our limitations as a project, we are trying to contribute in that space. And then trying to put in place infrastructure for WASH, which is water, sanitation, and hygiene, but also give knowledge. On this side of Uganda, we are giving skills in livelihoods and agriculture and income generating activities, depending on people's skills, interest, and what is available in the vocational training. Then when they go back, they can then be, they can contribute to their countries. So we are approaching them as really proactive contributors. Then when they go back as returnees, they are the forces of change that they want to see, they contribute. And just again, in summary, this is our package of interventions. Have a campus there in the middle, but we're working across livelihoods, protection, health, and education as well. Then we have embedded there a cross-learning, a learning element, which as a university, we are the lead on. Here, these are income generating activities. So we get people to get, whether it's kitchen, did I say kitchen, chicken or goat or agricultural rearing or farming, and then encouraging village savings and loan association groups. These are very popular for livelihoods, especially for people who have small monies, but they're learning the saving culture, learning the investing culture, and trying to put them in place, rather in touch with input dealers for an, I don't know if you understand, with an agriculture economy and, you know, multi-resistant plants and things like that. We're trying to get high, you know, like good quality seeds and breeds of whatever it is that they're doing. But some are also going into this other side of hospitality, mechanics, catering, teaching, different vocations, really. Those are the things we're doing under the livelihoods, and then trying to put those who are in business, give them access to credit, teach them financial management and a whole host of things. In health, I said it's WASH and strengthening the health system, training health workers, providing basic catalytic provision of certain essential medicines and equipment where possible, of course, within budgetary limits, but we are planting a seed. And then we're also working with the local leaders, the governments on both sides, so they can take that forward. We hope that's the plan. Whether they do is usually another thing, but yeah, those are some of the things. I think I've talked about the mental health and psychosocial, and using, one of them is using the WHO's tool. An interesting one also, if you have time and you're interested in mental health, psychosocial support, that's a good one, a good tool to read about and see if you can, how it's adapted. So I think I've talked a lot about our project, but in summary, if I were to say what makes us unique, one is for so long, people implementing humanitarian and development interventions have only operated on one side of the border. In this project, it's a cross-border project. We are addressing the push, the pull factors. We are addressing the now and the future, and we think that is a unique approach. We are testing this approach, and we hope that we will learn lessons from it. Then we also have strategic partnerships on all sides, at all levels, from the local community leaders to the religious and cultural leaders. For African settings, these are very influential people. They are the influencers, if you like. They really have a large following and a lot of respect. The religious leaders, the cultural leaders, the local leaders, but also the governments at the central and subnational level. We are involved with them. At the government level, they've been signing agreements and working agreements on what they will do to make sure that this project works. And one of the things, for example, they do is they've just invested a lot of money in building a youth center, just a youth center where people can go watch television, play games, like for relaxing. It's a small thing, maybe a small thing in such a setting that's developed. But for us back there, that's great. Just having a place with tiles and TV, and for refugee populations, I just need a space to just relax. That's one of the things they've done in South Sudan, which is very low on resources. So it's a big investment. And that's in one of the places that are going to put in each of the implementation sites. Then we think we are unique because we're dealing with multiple categories of persons of concerns. Again, usually most projects typically will either be focusing on IDPs or just refugees or just returnees or just host communities. But we're bringing all these with their diverse needs, with their diverse, there's a lot of diversity in needs and in interventions, and trying to tailor different things. Meanwhile, trying to ensure harmonious existence between the communities, refugee communities, host communities, returning communities, returning communities. There's so much that we are dealing with, and there are many moving parts, but we are trying. We also are integrating. A lot of interventions are interlinked. Like I said, we try to get the people who are getting mental health support. If they mention and we assess from a professional angle that they have a big livelihoods need, then we link them into the livelihoods intervention to get that. And then we'll be able to measure the linkages between mental health provision and livelihoods, because it's one thing to deal with someone being stressed about a job and say, oh yeah, you can go, you'll be fine, and you give them psychotherapy, when what they need is actually credit to start a business or skills to do something about it. So we're trying to integrate in a small way as a project. We think the project is also well positioned because it's implementing, I said again, on both sides to deal with those pull and push factors for these multiple movements. And also our partners are very solid in terms of either being rooted in the community or being internationally, globally. They have this experience for a long time, and we are aligned to the overarching frameworks of the Global Compact on Refugees, and then moving, including local populations, recipient communities, and making sure that their contribution is taken in place. So when we're doing needs assessment, designing some of these programs, we did a lot of co-creation and working with them. Even the research has a lot of working with local actors and researchers, so they say the process is all transformational, them knowing about their communities and hopefully even being able to devise some of these solutions. Of course, we put human security at the center. Protection is one of our intervention arms on the project. And we also embed a learning culture, say usually the interface and the relationship between academia and civil society or NGOs. It's usually short-term, transactional, one-off. Everyone is in their own world, but we're trying to bring about a fusion of these worlds, both worlds, not both worlds, three worlds actually. You have the policymakers on, because they chair what they call the LPAC, Local Project Advisory Committee, They are involved in these things. Recently, we had to go for signing another memorandum of agreement, and we had the top leaders at the border points and from the president's office, and then on the other side also the president's office on South Sudan, and their local leaders and the top government leaders all coming together. So we're involving everyone at different levels. Overall, we're trying. Sure. Yeah, so overall, I think that really makes it pretty much what makes us unique. And we're trying to operate across that. You have a holistic approach to addressing some of these issues. Let's put in a few pictures. I don't know if they are clear, but these are some, it's a meeting we had in South Sudan about 2 weeks ago. It's very old, not maybe fuzzy, but you have people from all over. That one is a government official from Uganda. I think here you have government officials from South Sudan. Here you have, this is a governor of South Sudan, but you can see security officials, education officials, and we were just coming out of a meeting that time that was going to sign an agreement that was going to lay the framework for which they would work. Oh, sorry, I think it's the same one. So we had closed meetings, and we went out also. This is my colleague at the center, the Makerere Center, Dr. Milton Muto. He was basically also talking on the role of academia. I think that's the media. And again, we're trying to get the media to spread the word about this approach. And they can be powerful allies. I'm sure you know that in terms of spreading the word and raising awareness and ramming up support for some of the things we're doing. This is us in one of the community. I think it was an education community committee, something that is kind of inclusive. You have people, all kinds of community leaders. But that is also in South Sudan. So going back to the question as I conclude, can humanitarian actions, can they address the causes and effects of forced migration? In particular, can a project like ours, a small project, can it address? Pretty much the question asking is, to what extent do we address these issues in the context that I have just described? I would say that, you know, this is to be determined. We don't know yet. That's what we're trying to find out. We are implementing. We have a hypothesis. We have what we hope to achieve at the end of the day. But this is how our timeline looks like. We assess needs. We've already undertaken the baseline measurements. We've refined the log frame to bring in changes. And then we are building capacity. We are strengthening support and collecting data. In year 3, we are going to assess at the end, validate, disseminate, and then we shall test our hypothesis or test what we thought might work and see whether it really does work. Yeah, is this approach, could it be the new way? Maybe, because this is more like a pilot thing. If it works, then we shall recommend for it to be taken forward in other places and say it's pointless to operate on one border and not touch the places where you want to send people back to, especially for neighboring countries. Yeah, but then I'm sure there are people in here who have some thoughts, and maybe that's where the discussion will lead us. What do you think about such an approach, a cross-border approach that deals with a plethora, really multiple issues all in one? It would be good to hear what you think about this, and I really want to thank you so much for listening to me, and I will take any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gloria. We'll now open to debate. I'm sure there are a lot of questions and things that are curiosities from.
Yeah.
You want this one?
2 minutes? Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
And also from people at home, from ones who are following the session. Let's see if any questions are heard here in the auditorium. So let's open to debate. Thanking once again, Gloria, for this wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
Sophia? you want to introduce just name and master?
Thank you. Good question. Can I take a few, or should I answer as
Yes,
they come?
they prefer
Okay.
more questions.
They don't even have to be questions. They can be comments, or you can disagree with what I have said, or share your own experiences if you have any. Also, that will be very much welcome.
I can join one question to Sophia
Please.
while the others are waiting,
Mhm.
which is you have been talking about your approach and how you're working cross borders, and you're trying to do a bridge and work in with a different model. What would you say that for now are your challenges to implement at, let's say, methodological level this project? Are there any challenges? Are you experimenting new methodologies? How is your approach to how to operationalize in the field your project?
Is this on the research side or
Research
side? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Yes, Anna.
Thank you so much for the presentation.
Yeah. That's right. Thank you. Okay, should I first answer those and then see if there are any? Yes, so very great questions, and thank you for asking those. I'll start with yours, Sophia, on the feedback from the population. I would say overall, we've had very positive feedback so far, partly because the university, Makerere, kind of comes in as an independent partner in a way. So the population kind of sees us as like an eye on the people who have been implementing these things among them for a long time. So when we were collecting the baseline data, for example, trying to undertake those baseline assessment, what is the issue? There were a number of things that came up in terms of need. In fact, we first undertook a joint community-led needs assessment exercise. Then we collected baseline data, and just recently, the week before I came here, it's about less than 10 days ago, actually, we went back. This time we went back with that picture you would have seen of the student who was trying to speak with the participants in the psychotherapy that was being received. And they seem to say there's a lot of change already. The project has only just started. It started last year in July, so we're still in the really fast year of implementation. But they say, so the questions we were asking are more around recruitment criteria. How are they recruiting people? How fair are they? The services for those that are already receiving either services or support or whichever form of support. How fair were the processes? Do they see any changes? And the feedback is really positive. For example, for the IPG, it's an 8-week course that they go through. It's 8 sessions over 8 weeks. And we just met a class that had just completed them. And they said their mental health outcomes were very different and for the better. And they were, they like the fact that the thing is, it is structured. It is, of course, I said it's a globally validated tool. That is one. Then for the farmers, like the farmer groups, they say that already they have, the first thing that we did was to train them in, we checked with what do they need. They have their own groups, but what do they need? So train them in bookkeeping, literacy, basic literacy skills and bookkeeping for their businesses. And then also things around team building, social cohesion, very simple things. But they say that these ones help. They are no longer fighting about who is doing what, who is late. They have rules, ground rules in place for those who don't show up. They fine those who won't show up for meetings. If it's a group meeting, it's a business meeting, and had things like you don't carry your personal things, don't bring food here, just focus. They're tiny rules, but they're really nice to see that they are trying to adapt to their own context and set their own rules and apply some of the principles that were being taught to them as part of the project foundational phases before they are given credit or before they are introduced to input dealers or these institutions like banks or financial institutions. That is on the livelihood side. On the health system side, that one is very easy. The statistics are a whole lot better because we procured certain equipment and then we also trained health workers in how to deal with the key health conditions that are presented at the facility. And when you look at attendance records for certain things, they have improved. And then we also have been, we had somebody stationed there collecting exit interviews from clients, like people who have used the services. And again, we're able to track that data and we see very positive feedback on that. I think overall, we haven't really gotten, I think the only complaint is that the monies are few, that we should do more because it's never enough, is it? But so far looks good. Feedback from the implementers, they feel like they're dealing with a group of people that now know so much and demand so much, which is a good thing. I think it puts them under some really pretty good pressure. And then they say they're also learning. They're learning from us, but we also tell them that we are learning from you too, because the things we are getting here are the same things we are taking back to our lecture rooms, our classrooms, and teaching our students about. Does that answer your question? Of course. Yeah, that's a great one. Uganda's policy says that for every
because at home
they don't hear. Okay, so Sophia's follow-on question is about whether my answer only applies to refugees, IDPs, and returnees, the beneficiaries. No, it applies to both groups. And the policy for the humanitarian or development response in Uganda provides, because of the integration factor, it says every time you intervene or every time you do any action, it's supposed to be at least 70-30. So 70 your population and then 30% the host communities. But on this one, we actually almost have, I think it's 60-40, so it varies between 70-30 to 50-50, because it's also a requirement for government. It's a compliance requirement. Joanna, good question on the challenges of operationalizing our methodology. Well, I think apart from, I wouldn't say it's more of the technical methodological challenge we encountered. It's more of the operational aspects that we encounter as we collect some of this data and as we track and measure the progress on ground. South Sudan has no stable network for internet, and yet some of our data was being collected at with a remote site. We were the quantitative data especially. So we were using CAPI, which is computer assisted. Some of you might know it. So they were supposed to be collecting data and uploading it on the system in real time, and then we're able to assess and draw conclusions and so on. We had problems with that, so we had to then adapt a manual approach to data collection. Then later on, pack those papers and send them to wherever we were, which was it took long to get some of that data. So there were, of course, there will be issues if you're not dealing with the data, it's yourself at that point. So there are some completion challenges, meaning we had to recruit more participants in order to make up for that. And then also some language issues here and there. but overall, I think there are more of logistical and implementation challenges that we face, because South Sudan, with the loan network and everything, is also incredibly expensive. Like what you would use for research implementation in Uganda, in South Sudan, you have to think about it about 4 times more. So again, and yet remember, we're operating in very restrictive budgets. So we had to get our partners, be very practical and pragmatic about how we still get robust data with all those challenges. So methodologically, I think we're doing fairly okay. We have a great team, but and then we're using standardized tools for the quantitative, but also qualitative. We're trying to make sure that as much as possible, it's similar across, but with contextual variations where they apply. I hope that answers. I hope it does. And then Anna, yes, Anna, that the yo-yo thing is interesting to everybody. It's I really so Anna asked about whether the yo-yo move, how the yo-yo movements impacts our project. I would even say beyond our project, it impacts everything, because the government itself is struggling to contain that movement, because there's a re-entry and re-entry. So tracking actual beneficiaries or people who benefit from this is difficult, for one, but also some of them really, you kind of get to see that there is a possibility of exploiting the system just for the sake, and that reduces resources for those who really need them, because of the yo-yo movers. But then it speaks to broader things like infrastructure development. I think that's the one thing which, again, humanitarian action cannot address, because it deals with relief, immediate support. Whereas when the going there is usually for business, for family, for culture, for social things, which can only be done, or it can only be stopped if on the other side things are as clear or as predictable as on this side. I would actually really encourage, have a read on that paper. Charles and Ryan, they really do justice to the whole yo-yo movement thing. In terms of how it impacts on our project, well, we're trying to work with the cross-border authorities, first of all, to make sure that the border entry points are monitored, partly for security purposes, but also for project tracking. You can't track impact if there's a leakage somewhere, and that's a big leakage. And then also the people that would show up as vulnerable might not really be that vulnerable. I think I've said this. So again, it impacts on who we recruit onto the program to benefit and who we don't. And sometimes these things are outside our control. You have to, somebody's there, and even when you know they're not as vulnerable. With those scale, it's difficult to apportion vulnerability and need for services on that project, which is, as I said, limited in all ways. So it's a question we keep thinking about, and but we know that, well, it's not a magic bullet, but for sure a very clear linkable solution is infrastructure development, the other side that can absorb, and then peace, which peace is at the government level now. So complex times and complex contexts that we are operating in, but it's an interesting one, this yo-yo movement thing. And that paper really talks a lot about it.
Thank you. We have here at home one question. It's Beatriz Salgueiro, also our student. As I understood, the project is based on a micro level with strategic partnerships. What has been the major benefits of this way of operating based on communication and resources?
Well, that's a brilliant question, Beatriz. The process, the project is true. It is, it's not entirely micro level. I think it's multi-level. It is multi-level. It operates at the community. If you remember the Global Compact on Refugees, and the approach we're trying to take is one which incorporates and embeds the contribution of the receiving communities, and trying to leverage their resources and networks. So when we are recruiting like local counselors, we actually are using people who have some sort of skilling in that area before, or respected people that someone can talk to about their problems. So again, using the skill that is there. But tapping from the existing resources within the community. We are communicating with a strategic, I think by strategic level, Beatrice might probably have meant at the macro government level. The benefits are that then you have all the stakeholders in one place and working towards a common goal. And everyone trying to contribute where they contribute best. The way the government of Uganda, because it has limited resources, I think it has tried to provide an enabling policy framework for international and local and community-based NGOs to work, development actors to come and work. If they have the resources, they have the skills, they have the motivation. The government will try to provide, peace where possible, and that's why it's working on that yo-yo, those porous borders and the insecurity that they bring about. It will provide, well, not citizenship, but refugee status, that you can do whatever you can. What you want is you can go out, get work, you can go to the same schools, whatever is there you can use. So the advantages are that everybody is able to do what they do best and contribute to a common goal. Just like as a university, we are not implementing, we are doing research, learning, documentation, and support, and capacity building and training. So when they want, for example, financial bookkeeping lessons, then we'll get someone from the business school to come and provide those basics of accounting, basics of group savings groups. When they want us to train border security officials on human rights and protection of vulnerable populations, we will get people from the School of Law or human rights to come in and teach on that. When we're dealing with mental health and psychosocial issues, we have people from a psychology, psychosocial, and social work and counseling background. So everybody is doing something that is in their niche. And I think by doing that, Beatrice, we are able to solve a common problem. But the jury is still out. We'll find out at the end of the project, like I said. Yeah, thank you.
Now, Lucia.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Because partly the Ugandan currency is really weak. It never is logical. It never is logical. But partly Uganda has the weakest currency in the region, unfortunately. But then, yeah. So, but then also the inflation costs in South Sudan have really they've gone through the roof. So there are all these astronomical costs that are associated. In fact, in South Sudan now, if you go to work there, either as a worker, an expat, or even if you're not an expatriate, you're paid in US dollars by all means, but then of course you spend in the local currency. But the inflation is almost what was seen in maybe countries like Zimbabwe at some point. That's why. Absolutely. Of course, when there's civil war, everything just nosedives, isn't it? Among many things, security just impacts on these things in every way, economically, socially, and so on. It's one of the effects of forced migration and conflicts. So, yeah.
I think we are having some of our students now have classes at 6. So I would suggest if we want to keep informally talking here in the auditorium, but I suggest us to be closing.
Yeah, and thank you so much for listening to me.
Yeah. Thank you, Gloria.